So if you didn't know, I've started moving into doing more live content. Streaming, as the kids call it. And I've heard some concerns from some of you out there about whether this will mark the end of my traditional, proper scripted videos. And the answer to that question is no. In fact, I have a video I'm working on right now, as we speak. And I think it's going to be about how much does a video game cost to make? $2? $3? How long does it take to make a video game? 2 days? 3 days? This isn't common knowledge, or even uncommon knowledge. Gaming isn't like Hollywood, where this kind of stuff is regularly disclosed. We don't actually know how much Banjo-Kazooie cost to make, or what its allocated marketing budget was. We don't even know how much most games actually end up making. It's a real rarity to get exact figures, which is why it's so interesting that, well, we got some. Due to some poorly redacted Sony documents from the FTC versus Microsoft case, we now actually have a little bit of insight into how much some of these games might cost. And it's a lot. So in gaming, much like the film industry, there's no such thing as a standard budget. Not all games are the same. The cheapest games are usually the indie games. Literally independent games often made by small teams consisting of a few people. These games are independent in the sense that they are not funded by a publisher. They can't rely on somebody to pay for an overly ambitious project indefinitely or finance the marketing expenses. Now, more expensive than the indie games are the AA games. AA gaming is a bit of a subjective term, but it refers to a game that is published by a publisher, obviously. Who else would it be published by? And it has quite a few people working on it, but not too many. Not as small as indie, not as big as AAA. AA gaming really used to be the most popular kind of game for a long time there. Beyond this, we have the AAA games. And AAA gaming is honestly a relatively new concept, all things considered. Like, games such as Halo 3 and Modern Warfare 2, the original, didn't actually cost all that much to develop by today's standards for a AAA title. Most games used to take about 3 years to make. But now, nobody expects a 3-year dev cycle, unless it's a Call of Duty game, or a sports game, or a AA game. So, from those Sony redacted documents, we found out that Horizon Forbidden West cost $212 million to make, and The Last of Us Part 2 was $220 million. I think this is well beyond what a lot of analysts might have been expecting, especially if this isn't accounting for marketing costs. Both games, by the way, took 5 years to finish, and these were still cross-gen titles, stuff designed to run on the last-gen hardware. What is so interesting about this is that before this leak, before Sony's lawyers decided to use a Sharpie, we didn't actually know for sure how much modern games might cost. Beyond AAA, we have AAA Plus. These are pretty much just AAA live service games. Since development costs will continue well after a game has shipped, they'll likely cost quite a bit more than your standard AAA game. Destiny was often cited as the most expensive game ever made at $500 million, but this was really nothing more than a marketing stunt, a series of eye-grabbing headlines created to drum up some hype. In reality, the game didn't cost anywhere near that to develop. But now, we're starting to see the rise of, maybe, the quadruple-A game. I know this term is a bit contentious, controversial. Studios like to say that a quadruple-A game is just something beyond the triple-A norm. But that really shouldn't be the definition. It should be something that costs more than the average AAA game. There's only a few titles that we could consider quadruple A. Star Citizen, for example, was a crowdfunded title that cost over $400 million and counting. It's been rumored that Halo Infinite cost $500 million to develop, which would make it the single most expensive video game ever made if true. This massive budget, by the way, would have been accumulated because of all of the development issues the project had seen. The upcoming Perfect Dark reboot was rumored to be quadruple A. By rumored, I mean they said it. This was definitely a marketing gimmick, and at the time, I don't know if it was even true, but now, considering development likely restarted, It probably is. Skull and Bones, Beyond Good and Evil 2. We don't know the budgets of all these games, but for the most part, if something is quadruple-A, it just means something has gone horribly, horribly wrong, with maybe the exception of a GTA 6. Is any of this sustainable for the AAA industry? Now obviously, the answer is no. Or at least that's what I'm going to say, because that's what this video is about. I've already done a video discussing live services and why studios are so insistent on pushing them, even if they seem to always fail. In short, publicly traded companies need growth, not just sustainability. Live services provide that ever-increasing amount of revenue year over year that makes investors happy. I've also talked about how game consoles, traditional gaming, seems to be stagnant. Consoles are selling about as well as they did 20 years ago, and there's just not a new audience that seems to be popping up. Revenue is up, but this is largely driven by microtransactions and subscription services. On the PC side of things, well, there is growth. There's huge numbers, but a lot of this is also driven by free-to-play South Korean MMOs. If you combine all of this, it paints a pretty dire picture for the long-term future of traditional gaming. And this is the problem. If we divide this entire audience between traditional gaming and those who know how to use a controller or mouse and keyboard to play these titles, are willing to pay to play games, and spend a decent amount of time for this in-depth, compelling content versus those who just want to play casual games on phones. One of these is objectively better from a business perspective, and it's that one. I've talked about this many times before. I don't want to keep rehashing the point, but if in 10 years this traditional gaming industry is stagnant, the publicly traded massive publishers might not be interested in continuing this kind of level of support. I mean, some will, surely. EA Sports, Call of Duty, the first-party console exclusives, but we might also see a shift in resources. For example, think about Activision Blizzard. They used to actually make a lot of different games. Activision especially made Tony Hawk and Guitar Hero and Spyro and Crash, and even these licensed titles. They took risks. They had a lot of AA games. But then they bought King, and their value exploded, and suddenly this stuff, this profitable stuff, they weren't profitable enough to make it worth it in comparison to the value of the corporation as a whole. And eventually, even AAA games weren't really worth it. It just made more sense to take these studios off of these projects, don't make the new Spyro, and go make Call of Duty Warzone skins. If you apply this mentality to the whole gaming industry, things could get pretty rough. I don't mean to alarm you, but in the next few years, it does sound like Sony's interest is shifting a little bit to the live service market. Yes, they will continue spending on single-player games, more so than they even do today, but their priorities are shifting. And this might be a necessity. Something that the publishers need to do, especially if they want to avoid the fate that Hollywood is facing right now. If you don't know, right now, 2023 might be the worst summer in Hollywood history for box office bombs. From Elemental to Indiana Jones, The Flash, The Little Mermaid, so many movies with exceptionally high budgets are just... they ain't doing well. But smaller films seem to be at least eking out a profit. Now, it used to be assumed in film that a huge budget would result in huge gains. It's high risk, high reward. It's really simple here. If you don't spend a lot of money to make a movie or a game, you don't have to make as much money in the box office or sales to make your money back. And I have to wonder if we're looking at a future where average development time and costs is beyond what we're seeing with Horizon and Last of Us. If we're talking 7 years and $500 million to make a game, well, who's going to even want to take that risk? The PC market is not a perfect parallel to the console industry, but clearly smaller games seem to do quite well on the platform, and budget has nothing to do with whether a game will find success. It seems like Ubisoft is taking more risks with the AA industry, likely out of necessity more than anything else. But I don't think it would be a bad idea for other studios to follow suit. Microsoft often gets laughed at for its first-party releases, but if you look at their AA, smaller titles, they're actually quite successful and good. There's always going to be a time and a place for huge tentpole titles, premiere pieces to show off the potential of new console hardware, or attract a broad demographic with shiny new graphics. But there is almost no way I can see this continuing indefinitely, especially if sales aren't increasing in tandem. It's been suggested that Xbox Game Pass and Sony exclusivity deals are helping fund these major titles, and I always took that as a bit of a lie, but if it really does cost this much money, then yeah, it makes sense. And I don't love to just end this video on a fairly milquetoast taste of maybe they should just stop spending so much money. Maybe they should start making more AA games instead. But maybe they should stop spending so much money.